Los Angeles, the autumn of 1969. 2 stages, 1 city, and 2 men who had built their entire lives around the same impossible question. What does it mean to be heard? Nobody planned for their paths to cross that night. There was no shared bill, no mutual tour, nothing written down anywhere that would have predicted it. And yet, by the time the night ended, 2 of the most different voices in American music would sit across from each other in a half-empty room and say something neither of them had said out loud before. Neil Diamond did not think of himself as a mystery. He thought of himself as a craftsman, someone who had learned his trade in small rooms with upright pianos, long before anyone knew his name. Years writing songs for other singers had taught him exactly how a melody needed to bend to be remembered, exactly where a chorus needed to lift so a stranger's chest would lift with it. By 1969, that apprenticeship had paid off in a way few songwriters ever experience. He no longer had to hand his songs to someone else to sing. Now, on this particular night, he stood in front of a packed theater on the west side of the city, watching the crowd hum the opening notes of a song before he had even sung the first word. That was the thing about his music. People did not just listen to it, they sang it back to him, like it already belonged to them, like he had simply found words for something they had been feeling, long before they ever heard his voice. Across town, in a club that smelled like spilled beer and cigarette smoke, Jim Morrison stood backstage, in near darkness, not speaking to anyone. He was not thinking about choruses or melodies. He was thinking about the silence, right before a scream, the kind of silence an audience does not know it is waiting for, until it arrives. Where Diamond's world ran on rehearsal and structure, Morrison's ran on something closer to risk, the constant possibility that the night could collapse into chaos or transcendence, and that nobody, including him, would know which until it happened. He had stopped trying to predict his own performances months earlier. He told a bandmate once that the moment he could predict what he was about to do on stage, the thing that made it worth doing would already be gone. 2 men, 2 rooms, 2 different definitions of what a song was supposed to do to a stranger. And neither of them yet knew that within a few hours, they would be testing those definitions against each other in person. Diamond's show was already in motion. The lights warmed the stage gold, and when he opened his mouth, the room exhaled with him, like they had been holding their breath the same way he had. He moved with the ease of someone who had learned, slowly and deliberately, how to be loved by a room full of people he would never meet again. Every lyric was an invitation. Come closer, stay a while. You are not alone tonight. He had built a career out of that invitation, repeating it night after night in city after city, refining it until it felt effortless, even though it had taken years of small clubs and rejected songs to get there. He believed in that invitation more than almost anything else in his life. It was, in many ways, the only language he fully trusted. But what the audience could not see, what no one watching him under those amber lights could have guessed, was that Neil Diamond often left a full house feeling strangely hollow, like he had given away something he could not get back, and no one in the crowd had noticed the cost. He would walk off stage to applause that felt like a wave, and within minutes, alone in a dressing room or a hotel hallway, the wave would recede completely, leaving him standing in a silence that none of those 1,000 singing voices had prepared him for. He rarely spoke about that feeling to anyone. It seemed almost ungrateful, given how much the audience had just given him, but it followed him from city to city regardless, patient and quiet, waiting for the lights to go down. Morrison's room was different. There was no warm light, no easy melody to hum along to. When he finally walked out, the crowd did not know what to expect. And that uncertainty was the entire point. He did not perform a song so much as surrender to it, letting silence stretch far longer than any of them were comfortable with, until the discomfort itself became the performance. Some nights people in the audience grew restless, even angry, certain something had gone wrong. Other nights that same silence turned the room reverent, as though everyone present understood, without being told, that they were witnessing something that could not be repeated on command. Where Diamond built bridges between himself and 1,000 strangers, Morrison built distance, and somehow, impossibly, that distance pulled people in even closer, the way a held breath pulls attention more than a shout ever could. It was Lou Adler, a producer who knew both worlds, who first mentioned Diamond's name to Morrison earlier that week, almost as a joke, while the two of them waited in a hallway for a meeting that was running late. "You should meet him sometime," Adler said, leaning against the wall, half amused at the idea of the two men in the same room. "Completely different animal than you. Write songs people want to sing in the car. You write songs people want to disappear into." Morrison only said, "Maybe that's the same thing," and walked away before Adler could ask what he meant. He thought about that line more than he let on. It stayed with him through soundcheck, through the long wait before his own set, surfacing again right as he stepped toward the microphone that night, as though some part of him already suspected the question would not stay theoretical for long. After both shows ended that night, fate did what no publicist could have arranged. A mutual acquaintance, a session musician who floated between both circles, playing piano for one and occasionally sitting in on guitar for the other, brought them together backstage at a small after-hours spot on Sunset. The kind of place where nobody asked who you were because everybody already half knew. The room was dim, lit mostly by a single lamp near the bar. The kind of place built for conversations nobody wanted to have under bright light. Neil Diamond recognized Morrison instantly. Not from a photograph, but from the way the room shifted slightly when he walked in. The way conversations softened without anyone deciding to soften them. The way even people who claimed not to care about rock and roll mythology found themselves glancing toward the door. "You're the one who doesn't smile," Diamond said, not unkindly, more like he was testing the water, the way a songwriter tests a line before committing it to a verse. Morrison almost smiled then, which would have ruined the joke. "You're the one everyone already knows the words to," he said back, and there was something almost gentle underneath the words, an acknowledgement rather than an insult. There was no posturing in it. Not the way there might have been with someone else. Not the way there had been months earlier, when Mick Jagger walked up to him backstage at a festival. Certain he was about to win a contest Morrison had never agreed to enter. This felt different. Diamond did not need to prove dominance, and Morrison did not need to prove danger. They were simply two men who had spent the evening doing the same job in opposite languages, and some unspoken part of both of them recognized it immediately. Diamond sat down across from him, still warm from the stage, still riding the tail end of that crowd's collective voice, his shirt damp at the collar from the heat of the lights. "I gave them something to sing tonight," he said. "Did you give them something too?" Morrison considered the question longer than Diamond expected, turning his glass slowly on the table between them. "I gave them somewhere to go," he finally said. "Not the same thing as a song they already know the words to." Diamond leaned back, turning that over carefully, the way he turned over a melody that almost worked but needed one more pass. He was used to being the one who built connection through familiarity, through hooks people could hum on their drive home, comfort wrapped inside 3 minutes of melody, the kind of comfort that asked nothing difficult of the listener. What Morrison was describing sounded almost like the opposite of comfort, and yet Diamond recognized something true in it anyway, something he rarely allowed himself to admit out loud, even to people much closer to him than a stranger he had just met. "Sometimes I wonder if what I do is real connection," Diamond said quietly, surprising himself with the honesty, or just a very good imitation of it. "A room full of people singing along, and I still go back to a hotel room alone afterward, and it still feels like nobody actually knows me." Morrison studied him for a long moment, the kind of look that had unsettled directors and label executives alike. But this time there was no challenge in it. "At least they're singing your words," Morrison said. "Mine just stand there and stare back at me like I asked them a question they're afraid to answer." It was the closest either man would come that night to admitting they were each chasing the same impossible thing, through opposite doors, to be fully known by people who would never actually know them. Neither of them solved it. Neither of them tried to, but for a few minutes in that after-hours room, something quietly shifted, the same way it had shifted earlier that year when Morrison stood face-to-face with Mick Jagger backstage at a festival neither of them would forget. Different stage, different stranger, the same ancient question underneath it. What does a song actually give a person, and what does it cost the one who wrote it? Diamond eventually stood to leave, his manager waiting near the door, the night already pulling him toward whatever came next, on a schedule built for someone whose songs were already becoming standards. He paused before walking away. "I think you scare people because you don't ask them to like you," Diamond said. "I've spent my whole career asking, in one way or another. I'm not sure which one of us has it harder." Morrison didn't answer right away. When he finally did, his voice was quieter than it had been all night. "Maybe neither. Maybe we're just two different ways of being lonely in front of a crowd." Diamond nodded slowly, like that sentence had landed somewhere he hadn't expected. He didn't say anything else. He simply extended his hand, the same way Mick Jagger once had in a different city, a different year, a different kind of challenge. Morrison shook it. They never spoke again after that night, not because anything had gone wrong, but because their lives were already moving in such different directions that there was never a natural reason to circle back. Diamond's path led toward stadiums, toward decades of songs that strangers would sing at weddings and funerals, and long drives home, his voice becoming something people borrowed to express what they could not say themselves. Morrison's path led somewhere darker, somewhere that would end far too soon, in a bathtub in Paris less than 2 years later, the silence he had always performed, finally becoming permanent. But for one night in 1969, two men who built their entire identities around being heard, sat across from each other and admitted, quietly, that being heard and being known were not the same thing at all, and that the loneliest part of either gift was realizing the audience could love the song and still never meet the person who wrote it. Decades later, when Diamond was asked in passing interviews about the strange constellation of musicians he had crossed paths with in those early years, Morrison's name rarely came up. There was no documented friendship to point to, no shared album, no public photograph anyone could find. Just one conversation, in one room, remembered only by the handful of people who happened to be standing close enough to hear it. And maybe that was fitting. Diamond's gift was that his songs reached everyone. Morrison's gift was that his moments reached almost no one, and yet the ones who were there never forgot them. Two different stages that night in Los Angeles, two different songs, two different audiences, two different definitions of connection. But underneath all of it, the same fragile human hope that had brought both of them to a stage in the first place. That somewhere out there, in the dark, someone was listening closely enough to understand what neither of them could quite say in conversation, only in song. That, in the end, was the only thing they ever really had in common. Not the music itself, but the reason behind it. The hope that a stranger, somewhere in a crowd, might hear something true enough to feel a little less alone, even if the man singing it felt exactly that way the entire time.